Hello and welcome to today's Up to Thrive Manage Your Mind Mindful Moment.
Welcome to Up to Thrive, your go-to podcast for women's wellness in midlife, designed to educate, support, and inspire you to live your very best life. And now your host, Dr. Karina Sims.
Recently, I was reflecting on a saying that I first heard as an intern rotating through my psychiatry rotation some years ago now. I don't recall the context of the conversation, but it was a conversation I was having with a consultant psychiatrist, and he shared with me that he believed the key to happiness, or the secret to happiness, was that everyone needed something to do, someone to love, and something to look forward to. That really stuck with me all these years, and I've reflected on it many times. I mean, it seems reasonable enough to me. I know I'm happiest when those conditions are true, and sometimes it's when I'm feeling a bit out of sorts that quote will pop into my head, and then I might do a little self-inventory. How do I feel about what I'm doing right now? Is it filling my cup? Am I balancing my responsibilities with downtime and self-care? Do I have a goal I'm working towards, or an event or a trip planned, something to look forward to? How are my relationships with those that I love? Is there someone that I need to check in with? How long has it been since I've chatted to my children? How connected am I feeling to my husband? Have I had enough time with my girlfriends lately? So this one little quote has helped me on so many occasions find a way to recalibrate, to check in and regroup. And I've often wondered where the quote came from. So this morning, I finally took a minute to look into it. And what I found, besides several little rabbit holes, which you're going to hear more about in a minute, was some really interesting stuff. Turns out that the saying was actually a little bit different originally. The original quote goes like this: "The grand essentials to happiness in this life are something to do, something to love, and something to hope for." And it was originally published in a book called The Sphere and Duties of Woman, a course of lectures. It was published in 1848, and it was written by a man named George Washington Burnap. I went looking to see if I could find the actual book, and I couldn't believe it when I found an original that had been scanned page by page and uploaded to the internet on archive.org. I didn't even know that such a site existed. So cool. It was really fun to see the actual book cover and the yellowing pages of a book that was written 177 years ago. So of course, I dove right in. I had no idea that the saying was actually originally written specifically for women. How fun. So I skimmed through the chapter titles and then the book. I just love seeing how much we have progressed over the years and picturing what it must have been like for women all those years ago. It's so fascinating to me, I suppose, in a way, because of what we're seeing right now in the menopause space. And I wonder, in 177 more years, what women will be saying about this revolution that's occurring now. The improvements that are being made in the care of women around the menopause transition, the improvements in understanding for the women themselves, for men, and for the medical community, the push for research. Who knows what we're going to uncover in the next years to come? I was immediately intrigued by this man who had written this book. From the title and the era, I expected it to be a book about how the woman's place was in the home, etc., etc. And the book does discuss the social and domestic duties of women at that time. But such a beautiful surprise. It also argues for expanding the woman's role and also access to education. Here's a quote from the conclusion of the introduction. "Let her know that there is nothing which rules by diviner right than woman, And there is nothing to which the human heart more involuntarily bows down than to woman when she adds to the natural charms and loveliness of her sex the crowning glory of a vigorous, a refined, and cultivated intellect. Now, it was a time in history when there was this great debate about whether women were intellectually inferior to men. Burnap's views seem to be that if women were given physical work or intellectual freedom to gain knowledge, the same as men, that they were in all aspects reasonably equal. It's hard to even imagine a man in that day and age saying those things. It made me so curious about him. So, of course, I went looking for more information. Now, it turns out he was a church pastor. He had been educated at Harvard. He was married at 29 years old, and they had their first child in the first year, a son who died 7 days after his birth. And then they had a daughter a year later who died just before her first birthday. Then some 8 years later, they had another daughter who lived well into her 80s. George died when she was only 17 years old, and he was 56. So I couldn't help but wonder the role that these tragic losses had played in what his views were, and in particular, his relationship with his wife and how awful that would have been for her to sustain those losses as well, especially as a mother. And several reminders of how far we've come in terms of medical care and health over all these years as well. And interestingly, along those lines, the book right at the beginning actually had a few pages from another book, obviously mistakenly uploaded as part of this book. At the top of the page, it said Bellevue Hospital Reports, and it looked like doctor's notes from a few case reports. It started in the middle of one case, and then it moved to 2 other cases. I couldn't really work out what the first case was. Like I said, it entered kind of midway through his admission, and the medical language was a little hard to interpret. Well, I assume it was some type of infection. And at first, I thought maybe it was like a gastro or something because they were really focused on this man's bowels. And if this poor man failed to move his bowels for even one day, they gave him an enema and forced it to come out. But then even in the next case, which was a guy with a septic knee, so an infection in his knee joint, he was also being watched like a hawk to make sure those bowels were working regularly. It was really fascinating reflecting on how this septic knee would be managed now compared to then. And of course, penicillin hadn't been discovered yet. That wasn't until the 20s. And then it wasn't actually put to good use in fighting infections until the 40s. So I was thinking that keeping the bowels moving must have been thought to somehow aid in health or treating or fighting illness. So of course, I went down another rabbit hole. And it turns out that in the 1700s and the 1800s, doctors believed that bowel movements were an important aspect of medical treatment. And that was based on the medical theory around what was called humoral medicine, which is all about balancing the body's fluids. So humors are just bodily fluids. I remember early in my career as a doctor, probably as a student or maybe even an intern, and learning about the evil humors. So when you had an abscess, we were told you needed to drain it. You needed to drain the evil humors. Never forgotten that. Now, you may recall also hearing this theory in one of my earlier podcast episodes because it was the same theory, the humoral theory, that had women undergoing bloodletting when they stopped having their periods during menopause. So with bloodletting, they would cut a woman's vein and let out some of the blood because they thought that it really needed to be done to balance the humors that were obviously getting unbalanced when her body wasn't doing it naturally through periods. And I could just imagine that her behavior was probably proof in a lot of cases, watching her sweat and maybe cuss a lot. Really fascinating. So you may be relieved to know in the book, the guy with the knee did avoid having to have an enema. Good for him. But he did have enough magnesium to open his bowels 6 to 8 times on a couple of nights. So they were really serious about this bowel business. He was also lucky enough to get the old leech treatment, where they stuck the leeches all around his knee. And then they made a cut in the knee and let all the pus out. The good news was that he was discharged after 17 days. The last line in the admission note said, walks as well as before the injury was received. And then it said, discharged, cured. Love it. So then I kept going and I went looking for the quote in the book that started the whole dive into the rabbit hole in the first place. And from what I can gather, the book was actually written from lectures that George had given as part of a course. Again, from what I could gather by reading the preface, it looks like he gave the first of these lectures to a group of young men, and then he gave the lectures to a group of mixed men and women, and then finally to women. There are 10 lectures in all, and our quote was found in the 4th lecture. The 4th lecture was broken down into several sections, and it was the first section titled, Marriage Generally Promotes Women's Happiness. That's where I found the quote. And it went like this. She is fitted to find happiness in that relation by the affections of her heart. The grand essentials to happiness in this life are something to do, something to love, and something to hope for. We all must have something to love. Especially is this the case with woman, whose capacity for affection is much greater than that of man. So today, reflecting on this, friends, is it time to do a little inventory yourself? Do you have something to do? Someone to love? Something to hope for or look forward to? They don't have to be big, dramatic things. In fact, it's often the smallest expressions of connection and purpose and anticipation that can steady us the most. If one of these feels a little empty for you right now, maybe try looking at it as an invitation rather than a problem. An invitation to nurture your relationships, reconnect with your own gifts, or even plant a small seed of excitement for the future. I hope you've enjoyed this Manage Your Mind mindful moment. And if you have, and you can think of someone else who might enjoy it, please pass it on. And don't forget to rate and review the podcast to make it more visible to those who might get something out of it too. Have a great week, everyone. And until then, I hope you opt to thrive.
The Opt to Thrive podcast is designed for information purposes only and is not engaged in the giving of medical advice. The information provided on the podcast should not be used for diagnosing or treating a health problem or disease. In no way should the information provided by Opt to Thrive be considered medical advice, and at all times the advice of a medical professional should supersede recommendations from Opt to Thrive. If you have or suspect you may have a health problem, you should consult your healthcare provider. The views expressed in this podcast are purely that of Dr. Sims and do not in any way reflect those of the institutions she contracts her medical services to.
Thank you for listening to Opt to Thrive. If you've enjoyed listening, please rate and share the podcast. You can visit our website at opttothrive.com and leave a comment for any subjects you would like to hear more about.